Now, the children in the school, in the district, they were getting to be older. There was a number of them growing up, and so far none of them were being educated. And my grandfather, Shandro, was the only, one of the few who could read and write in the Ukrainian language, and he felt that education in the new country was very important. He went to Edmonton. He got Andy Shandro to go with him as an interpreter, and they met with Frank Oliver, who was a publisher of the Edmonton Bulletin at the time. This was in 1904. And they approached him to see what could be done about having a school district started in their area. Now, they chose the site right in the midst of their district so that all the children wouldn't have that long a distance to walk. So they chose a site, the school was built, and everything was in preparation for this new teacher. Now, when he came, he didn't know a word of Ukrainian, and there wasn't a child who knew a word of English. So there they sat looking at each other the first day, and there were 39 pupils. Now, my father, William, was he was 10 years old at the time, and he was one of the pupils in the first class.
They had a very powerful instrument placed in their hands by Canada, which they hadn't the opportunity in the old country, and that was education. The children went to school to study and learn with the blessings of their parents, and they learned the ways and language of Canada. And they advanced rapidly. They advanced so rapidly that their parents were finally afraid that they would lose their identity. Because, well, even in our home, we spoke so much English that our parents used to complain, "Why don't you speak a bit of Ukrainian?" But you see, Ukrainian was forbidden in the schools because they were supposed to speak English, and you'd get strapped if you spoke Ukrainian. The children had no trouble with that. They could speak English all, and they did so well, and they took to education, well, like ducks to water.
Summer vacation meant Ukrainian lesson time, and of course under the tutorship of Reverend Zimanov, we went to the church manse, and there he taught us how to read and write in Ukrainian.
Before I went to school, I had to feed and water the chickens and put the milk through the cream separator and put the cream away in a cold storage. Also wash cream separator. And there are many parts to a cream separator. So most of the time I had to jog to school because I was late. During the winter we had a horse and a cutter that used to pull us over the snowdrifts. But in spring and summer, well, whatever part of the year we attended, we walked, or as I say, I had to jog to be there in time.
By that time, they had a lady teacher who came, a Miss Sarah Mosher, who was a very good teacher. But by that time, there were 65 pupils in the school, and the parents decided that they had to get another teacher. She absolutely refused to have anybody else, and she resigned because she wasn't going to teach with another teacher, and she went to another neighboring school, and they got a married couple to come in. My dad says about the first man teacher by the name of Sam Holmes that they got to teach there, and he was very athletic minded. He taught the kids to play baseball, which they never had before. They would just make a homemade ball and so on, and he got one for them, and he taught them certain games and so on. And of course war broke out in 1914, and Mr. Sam Holmes enlisted, and they learned later that he had been killed during the war. And of course that was a great tragedy to them because he was very energetic and a very good teacher, but he was a strict teacher, and they had fun, but they learned very well during that time.
And that school was there for many years. In time, two of my brothers and I taught in that school.
A couple of my cousins also taught in the school, but it was before my time. Dr. Bill Shandro was one. Another cousin of mine, Steve A. Shandro, which was the son of Andy Shandro, who was my uncle.
My first year of teaching was about 14 miles north, on the north side of the river, 14 miles north of my home, our home. Lilyfield School in Downing, Alberta. There I had 4 grades and I had 54 pupils. And out of 54, there were 8 in grade 1 who didn't know a word of English. So you can imagine how much progress we could make. Now, there was no accommodation for a teacher in that school, closer than, about 3 miles away you could stay with a family, but I thought that was too far. So there was a farmer living right close to the teacherage, and there was an old chicken coop that had not been used for, I'd say, about 5 years or more. So my dad got somebody to plaster it, and then whitewash it on the inside and outside, got a new door made for it, and also a floor put in. Now for a stove, I had one of these, I've forgotten what they're called, stoves that stand about this high and they're round. You put the logs of wood in from the top. And the side that faces the stove is nice and warm. In fact, gets too hot, but your back nearly freezes. So I would take a hot water bottle with me into bed, but by morning the hot water bottle was all slush. Now weekends, once in a while I would have a horse, take a horse from home and ride to the school. It's only 14 miles. And I'd go back weekends, go home on horseback. And on the way home, I would have to cross the river. There was no bridge at that time. There was just a ferry, F-E-R-R-Y. And that's the way I used to get home.
I think it was about 1947 or so, and then the school divisions were formed. And the rural schools, the time for them was over.
When I first started school, the first teacher we had it was a lady teacher, and she had a piano. She played piano, and she taught us music right from the beginning. Music was very important to her. So we learned to sing at a young age. And later on, in the higher grades, we had a teacher by the name of Nicholas Melnick. He was an MLA for a while, if you remember. He taught us, and he also was musical. He taught us choir, and choir singing, group singing. Also, we had a school orchestra. So somehow, my music came to me as I started school. And I played on guitar for about 5 years. Then I had an accident. I cut my hand and I cut my tendons in the hand, so I couldn't play guitar anymore. Then I picked up the cymbala and just kept on playing. At the same time, not only playing, learning and playing till this day.
Then we played Ukrainian dances, Kolomeyka, Hopak, Katerenka, you name it. We all danced, and we went to play concert from place to place. Like we went to Smoky Lake, Bellis, Wellington, Andrew, Community Hall at Shandro.
One summer, the community had brought in authorized Ukrainian teacher, a teacher of Ukrainian dance. And that was a tremendous time, well to be remembered. We did, I guess, we did quite a few concerts after that. We all acquired the proper clothing for it, and we went to the surrounding communities, and we did a program of dancing.
See, they put this on your head, you know, more or less like, I don't know how it would look now. And when they dance, you know how it flies. And this is the vest goes over. When I put now, it just comes in here. You know how many inches I grew? And this is the apron for dancing. See, this is done and fancy linen cloth.
Yes, I'm Ruth Grant. I am the fifth child of Andrew Shandro, who was a son of Stefan. Stefan was my grandfather. When I was 5, I lost my mother. That left us without a mother shortly after our home burned down. And we were housed in what would be called a garage today, but it was more or less a machine shed. And it was late fall, so grandmother came one day and in her Democrat packed us all up and took us to her home. Now at that time she had 6 children at home of her own, and she took 6 of us to her home. And we lived with her for quite a long time before we were able to get back to a home of our own. And these would be my memories of that family. Grandfather was boss, but grandmother actually ran the organization. She was a tremendous organizer. We all had jobs to do. I was not school age, so I didn't go with the children to school, so I was home. My job was to clear the table after each meal. The breadcrumbs and anything on the table was tossed out to the birds. Nothing was wasted. And then the dishes were washed and put back on the table for the next meal. Now that was seating 12 to 14 people for each meal.
I know there's a progress from there on. As the children grew, then they soon built a barn. Of course, the first thing they got was sheep, because they knew they needed wool for blankets and the mitts, and they knew how to knit, and the socks and jackets, the sweaters, you know, different things. So Grandma, they always had 100, 200 sheep.
We had sheep because that was necessary, because you couldn't buy so much wool for different things to make. And if you had your own, it was much cheaper. Would shear the sheep and wash the wool and color the wool and make into blankets and rugs and mats and whatnot. Whatever, it was really everything that was needed, we did it. So Mom knew all those things, and we were doing. We were doing all of those things, you know, crocheting or knitting and on the loom to make, and wool, you know, that you stretch the wool nicely, you know, and spin it, and all kinds of things out of wool we are doing.
And then we have to card it. Then you, after that, you put on those, like I said, on koziuka, you know, it's made like a spool. The wool is wrapped all around when it's carded. Then you spin, you know, you pull in here, and in here it just goes.
This was, but you know, this had to be, we had a bench, you know, with a hole, and you put in the hole of the bench that it has to stay solid, and you just work on it. See, but this is If it's nice long wool and you just pull and pull, but this is small because this is for a sample left, so I didn't do. To have the nice wool, it's just so nice, easy. You just pull and just work, work, work.
Also, what amazed me is many times we would come to visit grandmother Shandro, and she would have her wool on that stick on a bench, and she would sit and she would visit and she would spin that wool and so on. And my mother could spin wool, and lo and behold, she tried to teach me, and I never could get the knack of it.
My mother used to sing as she sat and spun the wool, and she would sing songs. She loved to sing, and she had really quite a good voice, and she used to sing songs of the old country.
Well, I do remember the woven blankets, beautiful, with very beautiful patterns. Grandpa made a great big loom, wooden loom, and in the middle of their big room in the house. And Grandma would weave these blankets. They had the sheep. She got the dyes from the old country, which were fast dyes. They didn't run, and they kept their color for generations.
That's what Mom gave for each of us 4 daughters, so she gave a piece for each one. So there was nice purple, but you just can't see when it turned like white. But what it was, the color, I know the yellow and gold, it was from the onions. Onion, as you peel the onion, you see, out of that it made the color.
You've got 3 or 4 different shades of that,
yes,
that
but
you depending, the different onions would give a different
different color, yes, because some are darker, just like brownish, and others are, just yellow. As the peel of the onion, that it's.
And the black?
Black is black sheep. You don't color that, and it doesn't run or anything. Black in here or those blankets or whatever. Black natural is the best.
This is a tablecloth. Long time ago, they had tablecloths just to cover the top part of the table, and the tables were narrow. It looks like this. I remember my mother using this tablecloth for us all the time. On holidays, Easter, Christmas, Sundays, that was the tablecloth we used. And it's made from hemp. Hemp, they call here marijuana. But I remember hemp very well. It's very useful thing to have. We used to make oil. We used to make all kinds of tablecloths, towels. This is the guest towel.
My mother, during the day when she came in after chores, she did embroidery and spinning. Embroidery during the day, during the night she spun. And this is one of the blouses. The work on it is very intricate. I could never do any of that. And of course this is a poyas, that the belt they wore. Traditionally, Mother wore this a blouse like this all her life.
This is the shirt that men wear every day. And this one with more embroidery, you wear it Sunday and to church or weddings and so on. You have real nice fine work done on this one. The bottom part too, beautiful. With this outfit, usually we wear a pyramidka. It's a pleated wrap around on your head. I'll show you later.
And it matches the pants, the purkiniti that are pleated. It matches the men's purkiniti. The headpiece goes along with that. There, or if I'm going to church, I wear the kiptarik, of course. And so does my husband. And on the kiptarik, as you see, there is a little bit left of nice shiny feathers from a drake's head, which Mother used to take and put on to the kiptarik.
My aunt, Mrs. Mary Manzik, they didn't have a family, so during the winter months, my auntie was so kind. She made 6 Ukrainian, I call them shirts, for all her nieces. And they're beautifully done. And I wore them very, very proudly. Very proud to wear them. And Tom really liked it too.
Not only these blouses, but we did scarves and pillowcases, you name it, tablecloths, everything. She would, when she wants a piece to be done, she goes ahead and she starts for us, and I and my sister Anne and Nancy and Lena, we just kept on going, one after another. And especially in winter when the sun is kind of low, it shines very nicely in the house. And that's the time we all get to work. Very, very many things. And we all learn from her. It's something that nobody can take away from us,
Does the pattern of the embroidery come from the Book of Enoch?
Yes, it is, and the colors as well. The red, the blue, yellow, and green. In fact, the colors in our house, the stairway to the stairs, the spindles were painted blue and green, and I remember there was red on the door. So those were the true Ukrainian colors.
We wrote Easter eggs, many. That was a big thing for Easter. And the various patterns, and the patterns always denoted history of the country. Like the green was the progress, and they had red, that was the suffering and the wars and that, and the black, those were the hunger years and different things like that, you see. And the yellow was the sunshine that they had, and the grain and ripening. All those things had meanings, and the patterns had historical names to them. And they were usually crosses and triangles, not flowers and circles, just triangles. And if the Pesanka in Vegreville is typical of that, one of the patterns.
Some of the cooking, I don't know whether it's important, but if I was out with my father, which I did go to all the big affairs with him, he would know exactly what part of the Ukraine or the Bukovina the cook came from by the size of the cabbage roll she made. You see, and then the menu was fairly well the same. There was a little variation, but I'll always remember he'd say, "Oh, this is so-and-so's cooking. I can tell by the size of the cabbage rolls."
My mom, she was a cook, kucharka, for the weddings, for big parties, for whatever. She used to prepare good meals in an earthenware oven. you know, that peach. And when the food is cooked together, you know, all different dishes, different food, like holoptsi and nachinka and chicken and pork, and you have it in the oven all in one time. You put into that earthen oven. It gives that smell that everything tastes so tasty that you can't imagine what it is.
There was a lot of everything. The land was so good, why not put something on it? And you put something and it grows. Beets would grow that side, and now you have beet like that.
So you always had enough food?
Oh yeah, that's one thing. You put anything there, it grows. And I used to like to make borscht, beet borscht. And those beets grew so big, you would take 2 beets and you have a big pot of borscht. And to that you add some good cream, not milky cream, but real cream from the cows. The milk was really good and rich, rich food.
And the harvest was a very interesting time also, putting away food for the winter. The garden produce, for instance, we would, I guess the one thing I remember most is putting up sauerkraut, which is cabbage. It's the only way you could keep it for the winter months. And that was grated cabbage, and it was usually a container, about 45-gallon oak barrel, which was all done in sauerkraut. That was put in a shed for freezing, and that was used all winter long.
I remember Mother in the butchering and making sausages, and she would hang them up in to smoke in the jorame of the log house. And she would collect willows to burn them in the peach, so that give them a distinct flavor.
Also in those days they'd get together, if somebody was building some building or something, the neighbors would get together and form a working bee and help one another. Those days that was very common, to help one another.
In winter they'd get together and they would have these feather tearing bees, and usually at Mother's place, and that's how I knew so much about them. And the ladies would sing songs, and the reason why I remember it so well is they used to sing Chomus ne prisho, Kolem Tobi Kazala, and they also sang Oi Piduya Luhum, Tammi Meliora Pluhum, and you know, he was kind of it had a story to it. Both of them had stories to it that I remember. But the thing I remember the best was that my sister Zenobia was a little girl, and my mother was supposed to put her to sleep, and Mother sang her to sleep. And she wanted the song Tobika. And Mother sang all the songs in her repertoire and could not, no, I'm not going to sleep until you sing me Tobika. And it was the song Chomus ne prisho, Kole Tobika Zala. Chomus ne prisho, Kolem Tobika Zala. Česko ňa nemau, dorohen neznal, če mamka nepúskala. Česko ňa nemau, dorohen neznal, če mamka nepúskala.
You know, there was no one person who did everything. It was a group person. They had building bees. We had feather tearing bees, and of course, you know, with all these daughters, you really had to
The dowry was probably, I would say, a complete set of bedding. And that is, the pillows were very important, and they were goose down pillows usually, and beautifully made. The comforters were carded wool, and they were always the very best and beautifully made, and these were set aside for the daughters for their dowries.
My dad and mom came from the old country, from the Ukraine, in 1904. And in 1907, this is the true Ukrainian outfit Mother wore at her wedding that I'm wearing today. This hat is for the groom when he's getting married. That's his binoc. And the bride, she will wear peacock feather. The young brides, they usually wear without a shawl. Some prefer to have a shawl on. When the bride is in church, just before they take the vows, the matron of honor will put a big shawl or a shawl on her, like they say in Ukrainian, pokrevalo.
And this church service is very impressive. They hold a large crown over the bride's and the groom's head, and everything is done in threes. They tie their hands together and they go around the altar 3 times. And the ladies met before the wedding. They decorated the home, they decorated a tree of hope for the bride's table, and they made the headpieces for the bride. And they used to sing songs while they worked. And of course, the preparation for food was about a 3-day affair too. And remember, there was no refrigeration, but they had ways and means of doing all that. And there were certain ladies who were cooks. The kitchen was a wonderful place because they used to sing songs while they worked. And it was a happy event. It was the event of the season. With the wedding, of course, it usually lasted 3 days. And there was quite a bit of routine to it, and they're all very similar. There was no gifts as such because they didn't shop. They didn't have the money, nor did they go shopping for gifts. But usually the man arrived carrying 2 loaves of bread, or the kolach. It's a braided bread, a large round loaf of bread. And that was what the man brought. And the woman usually had a chicken under her arm with its legs tied. And this chicken was the gift to the newlyweds. And the chicken was put in a pen till after it was all over, and that was the start of her flock in their new home. Now they just set up long tables and they ate in relays. And it was a continuous dinner. One group would leave the table, and then you cleared the table and set another group, and the bridesmaids were responsible to see that everybody had been in for dinner. And of course, they had music. They had an orchestra, and they had built a platform out in the yard by the dining room. And the people danced. And when they were not eating, they were dancing and visiting.
Well, it was interesting as a young boy because as boys, and if you were at the bride's place, we stood at the gate, and unless the groom gave the boys a bottle of whiskey or something, we weren't going to let the bride go. And boy, we thought that was fun.
My name is Nick Shandro, and my father was Fred Shandro, and my mother was Annie. And my father came to Canada in 1920, a young man of 20 years. He was very interested in Canada because of the instability that was occurring in the old country, in the Ukraine, the wars, the level of corruption. I can recall my mother talking about when they were immigrating to Canada, one of the last hurdles was to board the ship for Canada. And at the very last minute, apparently one of the officers there decided that my father, who was a healthy man, had apparently some health problem. And therefore, the only way out of it was to pay a bribe. And likewise, my mother, she came over a year later with her family. She had convinced the grandfather that life in Canada would be much better than it was in Ukraine. There was no future there. And with some reluctance, the family sold out their few acres of land and bought the ticket over to Canada, moved into the Glendon area, which is a Ukrainian community. And my father worked for his uncle Nikon for some time, but he was very anxious to get on with farming, and he tried to get whatever jobs were available. He worked for some time on the railroad, took on whatever jobs were available. He was joined in 1927 by a brother who came over from Bonello, where the family was from. And they both worked on the railroad, and his brother suffered an accident on the railroad and died, so he was only in Canada for approximately 2 years. But by that time they had established a homestead in the Bonnyville area. And shortly thereafter, I'm not sure what the year was, but after 1927, a year or so later, both my grandfather and grandmother were moved to Siberia under situations where my father didn't know why they moved over there, and within 2 years they were no longer alive. The suspicion was they had starved to death. He could never ascertain what the reason for their deaths were. In 1931, my mother and father were married in Bonnyville. The marriage was arranged through my grandmother, who was very interested in, as probably was a custom in many Ukrainian homes, in their daughters marrying and getting on with life. And the marriage was established, and they set out to build a house on the homestead. The house was built in the first year they were married, and approximately a year later it burnt down through an accident that happened with a fire. So it took them through the 20s to get it established into a farm. And at the time they got the farm established, it was now in the height of the Depression, and times were very, very tough. Grain was selling for approximately 18 cents a bushel in those days. I can recall stories where in order to get some goodies for Christmas, you had to barter eggs and chickens and so on just to get a few raisins.
During the Depression days, or after the First World War, and there were a lot of people coming in, and during the winter they didn't have any work, and they congregated in the summer kitchen out in there, and there were about 7 of them, and Grandmother Shandro, they didn't pay any rent or anything. Grandmother Shandro made sure that they all had food and everything. That was the concern for their fellow beings in those days.
I should tell you one about a funeral. My grandmother died in our home while only Mother and I were at home. We knew she was going to die. She was ill for a long time. But as it happened, it was in 1936 in April. She died on April the 4th. When Grandmother passed away, I had to, it was about 10 o'clock at night, I hitched up the horses, I went out and I got all the ladies in the area, Mrs. Simon Howerlack, Mrs. Cedar Shandro, Mrs. Nikon Shandro. They came to help Mother to clean the body up and get it ready. I went out on the cemetery and cleared the snow and brought a load of wood and straw and started a fire. You had to dig a grave. So the only way you do it, you thaw the ground. And next day I went to Willingdon and I had Bill's son build a coffin. I went to Uchelek's store and I got the lining for the coffin, and the coffin was built. I went to the liquor store. I was only 16, I think, or about 16 years old, but you knew each other in those days, and they helped me. I got a little bit of wine, and everything was prepared. I went back, and we dug the grave, and within 3 days, we had the body buried. I did drive a few maternity cases because we were the only ones. Anyhow, it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and I hear a door, someone knocking on our door. And the roads were still pretty well blocked because they had been drifted. But the drifts were high and the sleighs were banging everything to one side. We had a Model A Ford, so I come downstairs, and here is this fellow knocking on the door. I knew who he was, but he was just a hired man. I said, "What do you want, Alexa, at this hour?" I thought someone died or something. Well, he says, "George has gone on a cheap fare to Edmonton, and his wife has lost the water." I knew she was pregnant. So anyhow, I didn't take the Model A Ford, and I maybe should have, but I took a half-ton truck. And cross-country, I went 4 miles where there hadn't been a car for 5 months because of snowdrifts. But the road was banged out to the side, and I just made it through there. I got there, I got this woman in the truck, and I says, "I'm not going alone." I says, "You better come with me." So Alexa gets in with me. We start driving, and all of a sudden I got a flat tire. Well, that didn't take long. I was an expert at that. I changed the tire, and away we went. I went about another 4 miles, and there was traffic on that road already, and cars were going through, but it was frozen. It was ice and ruts and mud and everything else. I tried to straddle the deep ruts, but sure enough, I slipped off and hung up, and there I was. Pregnant woman and stuck in a mud hole. So Alexa and I, it wasn't far from fellows, I don't want to name them, from their home, but I knocked on the door and I asked if he would come and pull us out. Well, no, he was the type of a guy that wouldn't pull anyone out at that hour. It was about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. So we started carrying wood from his pile of wood to put underneath and try and jack the truck and get over. That didn't work. So I knew the people farther up, a half a mile. I ran, and it didn't take them 5 minutes. They were on the road to pull me out of this ditch. So I got out of there, out of the ruts. I got out of the ruts, and I didn't slow down for anything. I made it to Lamont just in time.
I remember back in the 40s, there were smaller crews, but one particular time, Andrew Shandro had a big case steamer and a big case separator, and in fall, when they'd get into the yard, it was a real picnic. There used to be 12 teams with racks hauling sheaves, and also there were 4 spike pitchers by the thrashing machine helping to unload the sheaves, as well as 4 extra men, field pitchers on the field, helping to load the racks. So that was a lot of men and a lot of horses. Also, there was a fellow hauling water to the steamer, another fellow hauling coal, and then there was about 4 wagons and men taking the grain away. So all in all, there was a good 30 men or even more. And you can imagine how many horses. So when they came in to thresh and the weather was good, you were lucky. Because a day or two you got done and they were away. But if it happened to rain or something, well, that took a lot of feed and food to feed everybody, as well as feeding the horses. So that's how they used to get their threshing done in those days. Not like now, one man sits on a combine and can do more than those 30 men in a day.
Agriculturists are talking that in the future we are going to see 10,000 acre farmers. So that does is, you see now 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 acre farmers. You get to 10,000 acres will be an average farm. Our area, you're going to have one farmer here and one farmer there. There will not be the people in this area to support a thing like this. That is what they're envisioning. And we're trying to hold on to the past, but we cannot. We got to let go. But the memories will be there forever.
Maybe you could talk about the history of the museum here.
Well, my dad was instrumental in it. He was quite interested in some of the things. He could see so many of the things passing away, the changes that were taking place. Like we see changes today. We see changes like in communication, computers. I'm a dinosaur. We don't understand it. He had the sense to understand that the changes were taking place, and he wanted to preserve some of this. So he started off with kind of a home, and then he donated some land in here, and he worked hard at it. And he enjoyed doing it. And when you look back now, I can understand it because I lived through that era, or at least part of it, and we knew about it. But it's a real history for our kids.
Mother was a vibrant, hospitable person. She was very kind, cheerful, open-minded. The good sense of humor. My father and mother worked hard, and there was no division of labor. Whatever needed to be done, they worked at, and they were very compatible. I do not remember my parents arguing. They seemed to talk things out, and they did it. And the values they instilled in us at an early age, I think, have stayed with us throughout our life.
Today we recognize that some of those values are falling away, and it is sad to a degree because it was a very rich heritage that we inherited, and we can't kind of seem to bring it back, and it is sad in a way. Life goes on.
But that was progress, Nick. So times are changing.
And I remember the happy times, happy events that we enjoyed at Grandma and Grandpa Anna, Nick and Shandro's home. It was a yearly event. Every year on Easter Monday, all the family got together, their children, their children's spouses, and their grandchildren, and it came to that at times there were up to from 25 to 30 grandchildren. And so we got together for association, for relaxation, and we looked forward to those occasions. We knew that if we didn't see our cousins during the year, we would be sure to see them all on this occasion at Grandma and Grandpa Nick and Anna Shandro's place. So it was a way where we really were close-knit, and we were united, and that bond of unity and the like has carried on down to this day.
They were a very happy couple, because wherever they went into the parties or cram or weddings, they were great singers. They sang songs. I don't know if 100 songs a night is enough. They just kept on from one to another, and they kept on singing, and everybody just joined around and enjoyed. People would just listen. I really am very proud of my parents because they were very artistic, and we children are all. I'm very thankful to them that, they taught us something for your life and children from our children and then grandchildren and so on. So that's what it was.
We had like when you die, if you know what that.
That's caroling.
Yeah, and that when Christmas time comes, they fill up 2 or 3 weeks of those holidays of getting together or making dances or whatever. That was it for enjoying.
I recall when I was just a little boy, and in winter, January 19th, Yardan, they used to go and bless water on the river. It must have been, 40, 50 below. And at that time, there was a lot of people coming to church. And when they all went down to the river, it was all horses and sleigh, and you could just hear that frost, all that, how the sleigh screeches when it's frosty. And there was a lineup, maybe for a mile or more, horses and sleigh down to the river. And then all the people standing around, they cut across in the ice, and all the people standing around, I was wondering how come that ice never broke down. That's one incident I recall when I was just a little boy.
It was important to get together during christenings and even funerals. They'd always have the big meal after a funeral in remembrance of the departed.
Yeah, Pravda. Okay, so no, that was the week after Easter, and they blessed the graves. The graves are all blessed that day, and the sermon, they do have we call it a mass or a sermon in the church for 2 hours, and then they get out on the graves, and he does another sermon at the cross there. Then he goes around and blesses every grave. Then we all put our sheets or cloths on the grave, put our paskas and the fruit so he blesses them before we give them as a pomana to people in memory of. If your father, your mother, your brother, or your sister, or even your grandparents, even as many years ago as it's all happened, it still carries on. There's still pomanas being given.
And what did your mother tell you what the reason was?
Well, for them to have food up there.
In 1979, St. Mary's Church was designated as an historical site in Alberta. This coincided with the 75th anniversary celebrations. On August 28th, St. Mary's, or Assumption Day as it's called too, I attended the annual St. Mary's Day Church Festival, which is known as Hram. The reason the church is very dear to me is for several reasons. One, I was baptized in it. Two, I went past it twice every school day for 10 years. My late husband, Bill, and I were married in it. My grandmother, Anastasia Shandro, turned the sod to mark the spot that was chosen on which their church was to be built. I also sang in the choir along with my sister Lena. As I looked around, I thought, well, wouldn't it be appropriate to have a portal, an entrance with an arch built where the gate now stands and into the church grounds?
Long time ago, the church was full. There was a lot of people in the area. In fact, when I was just a little boy, I recall that many times it was packed. Many times it was packed inside and there was a crowd outside. Nowadays, it's a different story. It's not only here, I think all the churches are that way, especially out in the country. The people just aren't there anymore.